Organissima, New York. Your exotic skin, hair, and beauty source, and your one-stop shop for all your natural and organic skin and hair care, featuring authentic organic Moroccan oil and prickly pear seed oil and much more. Bringing you only the best, straight from the source and proudly produced in the USA. So what are you waiting for? Shop today at www.organissima.com. Organissima, New York. Your beauty is our duty.
Folks, welcome back to the iHealth channel. iHealth Radio, your host, Hurricane H. As always, new day, new show, new topic. And this topic today is going to be an interesting one because it's something that I personally, when I heard about it, I'm like, how does this one connect with this one? And I'm being ambiguous for a reason, and we'll talk about that. But with me today, I have a specialist, a doctor in physical therapy who has his own practice, but he treats physical therapy in a whole different one. That's what I meant, the right versus the left. And, I'm still, again, being suspicious here and suspenseful, but that's on purpose because I don't want to take the thunder from my guest today. So I have with me Dr. Johanthan Taves, and he will guide us through the world of physical therapy in a way that we have not heard of before. He's also a host of a podcast called The Headache Doctor Podcast. Did I get that right?
You did, yeah. The Headache Doctor Podcast. That's right. I'm happy to be on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure, and we made it work. So, Doctor, as always, first things first. Let's talk about you and your background in terms of how you. I mean, obviously, you're a doctor in the physical therapy, but what got you into it first? I mean, because there's a lot of specialties, and you did that, and also like about your practice, and then we can talk about deep dive into like the topic of the hour today.
Yeah. So I'll start with my story. There's probably more details that would bore the listeners, but what I'll say is that I was a soccer player, played soccer through college, and so it just was natural for me to want to. I was excited about understanding the body and how the body moves. Physical therapy is a natural next step for a lot of, let's say, college athletes that are just like, wanting to scratch that itch of understanding human anatomy and then working with people in a way that helps them move better was very attractive to me. So I pursued physical therapy. I went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. It's important to understand, though, that my philosophy and how I look at headaches and migraines, Mayo Clinic would probably want me to say that it's not necessarily the same way that the Mayo Clinic or what I was educated on. And the main reason is in physical therapy school, and what you're referring to or alluding to is physical therapist in the headache and migraine space. There's not much of a connection there. And so my journey has been sort of connecting physical therapists and this idea of restoring movement, restoring function of the body can be super helpful for people with headaches and migraines. And so what happened was in PT school, I got connected with a few providers that were doing what's called manual therapy. So they're working with their hands to correct dysfunction. So you think of this as like someone that has low back pain, neck pain, shoulder issues, knee problems. And most physical therapy practices are set up with a big open gym setting, and you've got your exercise equipment, maybe some tables, and you're sort of going and rehabbing, and people think exercise, which is important. It's not as if exercise has no place here, but manual therapists primarily work with their hands. And so the setting is more just a one-on-one treatment session. Some people put it in the category of, they think of it almost like chiropractic, but it is a little bit different because our philosophy and what we're trying to do is restore motion and function. So our evaluation and treatment process has more to do with how things are moving and how we know they should move and restoring that, as opposed to looking at alignment. And so I got to shadow and train from these good manual therapists. And it got me excited because these were guys that had people coming in from all around the state. And within a session or two, I mean, like very quickly, people were finding relief. And one of them in particular was working with the neck and the jaw. And so I took a weekend course from him and just found it really fascinating. So I went and shadowed him, and he was treating people with headaches. And it was kind of like you're saying, Hurricane. I didn't realize that there was this really a connection between headaches and what we could do as physical therapists, but it was fascinating to me. So after school, I pursued that, and I started seeing patients with headaches, and it was one of the most rewarding types of work I felt like I could do as a physical therapist, because it had such an impact on these people's lives. Headaches and migraines especially can be very, very debilitating. They are very debilitating. And so being able to provide a non-medication approach to this seemed like there was this gap in the market. These people were not educated on this type of treatment, mainly because it wasn't very prevalent. So I was seeing patients with headaches, and then I occasionally would have people with migraines come across my schedule. So what I initially thought was, oh man, this migraine, what is this? It's like a neurological problem. I got to send them to the neurologist. And but what they would tell me is that they've been to X number of neurologists. They've been to 3, 4, 5 in town. They've tried all the medication and nothing seems to work. And so they'd come in and I'd evaluate them the same as I would these headache patients, and they'd have this neck problem, and I'd treat the neck and they would get better, and like remarkably better, like almost to the point of they're cured of their migraines. And I kept doing that over and over, and these patients kept getting better. And so I just got so passionate about it. I said, this is a problem that people with migraines and headaches they're not being provided with this option, and they're not being educated on that the neck or the jaw or the shoulders can even lead to these types of symptoms. And seeing that gap in the market just made me want to step into that in a way that like was almost undeniable. Like people we're focused on it. This is all we do. Headaches and migraines, we're a specialty clinic. Because of that, we've gotten very good at what we do. We don't shy away from any type of headache or migraine. We've basically seen them all and had good results with them all. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, I guess. There's, or maybe that's the long version, however you want to take it.
No, actually, that's perfect. And just to create the context of what it's all about, because I think the secret is out already. So,
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I was all being, elusive about things, and, but the idea here is that we know about physical therapy. I've been to physical therapists. I've interviewed physical therapists, and it's usually a great fit for the body, the motion, as you said. Athletes usually need that, and I love your background. And by the way, I want to commend you for that. I mean, something that you've loved, you've done, and you experienced, and you knew that there was a need for it, and therefore you went for that passion and you pursued it. And then ultimately through that pursuit, you found a little bit more of an angle that most people may not even connect. And that's really what I was alluding to earlier, is that physical therapy, headache, they don't really, go, like side by side. They're definitely, two different things. But there is a link, and you've discovered that, and you've made that as a specialty, and you've been, I guess, advance into this particular area of expertise. And I haven't heard of a clinic that does that actually as a physical therapy, to be honest with you. You were like the first one, like, well, we do have to have an actual show about this, because I think it can help people, because I think everybody watching and listening, you've experienced a headache level. Now, what that means, it could be many things. And that's when, we're going to ask the doctor today about more of the descriptives and what means, a headache versus a migraine is, one of the same, and, what the levels are. But the idea is we all have experience in them. I get them. Sometimes you're not sleeping well. Sometimes you're making the wrong move. Maybe you have low sugar. It could be many things that can affect your, head. And sometimes you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or maybe you have a bad headache since you had a nice party the night before. I mean, it's Saturday morning. A lot of people wake up with a headache. So
that's true. That's true.
I'm not going to go further there, but so there's a lot of that. But really, you think physical therapy is, you say, like, you go to gym setting and you get all these machines, and you got to really typically we also hear about that, besides athletes, accidents and things. So you do need to get back in shape, and you get a little bit of that, activity. So they get you like mobile again and doing your thing, like, you be more functional. And again, the last thing is, like, how does that work? So the question is now, doctor, first, if you don't mind, can we break down actually the headache? Because headache, I think, is a general term. We all have a headache because your head hurts. I mean, that's all simply what it means, right? But what does that mean? I mean, I know there's more to it. There's front, back, there's different things. And then what are the triggers of headaches? And then we can talk, as we go through the show, like the type of things that you do and the outcomes that you have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great starting place because understanding definitions of, a headache and a migraine is really important to understand because it gives us context for, what are we even talking about here? And especially in this space of the migraine world, it can be, I guess, it's such a debilitating problem and something that patients really have a hard time finding a solution for, that it's like getting the definitions right and validating that like this is a terrible, terrible thing that it encompasses and sort of takes over people's lives in a way that can be very, very frustrating. And especially, you go through our healthcare system and you meet with neurologist after neurologist, and it seems like they should really be able to provide you with a solution. But one of the major problems is that the why behind these symptoms is not really explained to people, and mainly because it's perceived to not be understood. So if you try to get to the bottom in our healthcare system, if you try to get the bottom of like what is happening when someone has a migraine, what they will say, and I'm not disagreeing with this at all, but what's happening is this: it's almost like a hypersensitivity within the neurological system that is perceiving pain and other sensory inputs as sort of like alarm bells are going off. So there's a high level of pain that's typically a one-sided throbbing sensation, and I'm talking about the migraine category. But then you can also get sensitivities to lights and sounds, a visual disturbance, numbness, tingling. There's all sorts of other symptoms that can accompany a migraine. And usually if you have a list of those symptoms outside of the head pain itself, but the classical sign of head pain that goes with migraines is that one-sided throbbing, pounding sensation. But if you have a series of those other symptoms, you will get diagnosed as having migraines or migraine. And so it's seen as this neurological disorder that is really just has to do with the neurological system sort of generating this problem, but they don't know why it's generating this problem. Okay, so the why behind that is not well understood. And so oftentimes people feel frustrated and sort of hopeless in a sense. So right now, the healthcare system sort of stops at it's this neurological problem that naturally leads people down this road of medication. So now we have to manage this hypersensitivity, this response that's debilitating through whatever type of med. They start at the most conservative and they work up. But basically, those medications are masking symptoms in one sense or the other. Now, medications have their role. It's not as if I'm completely anti-medication. I mean, people need to function. I actually listened to another podcast of yours with a chiropractor, and he kind of had the same approach where he said, medications, like it's a debilitating problem. It's hard to find a solution. And so medications, if they keep you functional and improve your quality of life, are great. But having no sense of like, why is this happening? Or is there a more conservative approach is the problem. Now let's talk about headaches. So there's probably dozens and dozens of different types of diagnoses. So there's an international classification of headache disorders that has all of the different types of diagnoses that you could get. Now, just like the migraine diagnosis, when you're talking about the different types of headaches, any type of head or facial pain, really those diagnoses are just a reflection of your symptoms. So you describe what you feel. So let's say you have temple pain, and it's on both sides, or maybe it's like a strap. That would be a tension type headache. Maybe you have a type of pain that starts in the neck and wraps up and around the head. That could be in the migraine category if you have those other symptoms, or it could be what we call a cervicogenic headache. So tension headache, cervicogenic headache, and migraine are probably the three most common diagnoses. Okay. Now, the underlying problem, so I'm going to take a step back and sort of like look above all these diagnoses. Okay. So we're not talking about one in particular. We're just talking about head and facial pain in general, which is going to be a category in any type of headache and migraine. Okay. So why would someone have head or facial pain? Well, one of the things that's overlooked in our healthcare system is that the upper part of the neck, so anywhere from the base of the skull down to C3, so that's your third bone in your neck as you go 1, 2, 3. Anywhere in there actually has innervation or sensory nerves that travel through the brainstem. and they meet up with other nerves, like one of them, the primary one being the trigeminal nerve. When we're talking about headaches and migraines, the trigeminal nerve has these 3 branches that pick up sensation from the face. Okay, this is kind of complicated, but hopefully you're following me here. So the neck, the neck and the face are connected through the brainstem. Those nerves meet up in what's called the trigeminal cervical nucleus. And so the nucleus, that's just like a bundle of different nerves. And then it sends a common signal to the brain. Okay, that's like a I guess maybe one step above the neurology class you had in high school, and maybe one step above what you may have learned in college. But the brain, it's interesting how we perceive pain. So the brain gets this signal, and because of this combining of different nerves, and there's a lot of different structures and nerves that are meeting in that trigeminal cervical nucleus. But for the sake of this conversation, we're just going to use the trigeminal nerve as an example. When it hits the brain has to figure out not only like what the sensation is, but where it's coming from. Okay. So think of referred pain. Is referred pain familiar to you?
No.
Okay. So referred pain would be if you push on a tight knot in your shoulder and it shoots pain into your head or your neck or down your arm. Okay. So think of like if someone is having a heart attack, they have shoulder pain, they have neck pain. Okay. And what's happening there is the brain is getting a signal of something's wrong, and it's trying to understand what's happening. And so your brain is perceiving like, oh, the shoulder has a pain signal coming from there. So it's getting the location of the pain wrong. And so you're feeling referred pain. There's nothing actually wrong with your shoulder. There's something wrong in another part of your body. Okay. Am I losing you here? Or are you is this making sense?
Actually, it's perfect. I'm visualizing the whole thing. And yeah, definitely, doctor, you're doing great.
Okay. So the upper part of the neck is sort of sending the initial alarm signal. Okay. And this is in many, many cases. This isn't necessarily like 100% of people with headaches and migraines, but it's a large percentage and it's overlooked. So the upper part of the neck is sending the alarm signal. Just like in a heart attack, the heart is sending the alarm signal. The brain is getting the signal, but it's confusing the location. So it's assuming that the pain is coming from the head, or it's actually confusing the type of input. So that's why those other sensory inputs, like in a migraine, the brain thinks like it's hypersensitive. So sensitivities to lights and sounds and those types of things. So when people go through our healthcare system and they get an X-ray, an MRI, a CT scan, and they're looking at their brain, which again, oftentimes that is appropriate, just because we do want to make sure you don't have a tumor or something that would be more life-threatening. But most of the time they don't find anything. And so people leave with like, well, my head's fine. And we don't know where this pain's coming from. So we just have to treat it with medication. And I'm almost done here, but let me explain why the neck is overlooked. Okay. So it's a movement problem. I talked about physical therapy, helping people restore function. We look at movement. Okay. So the neck, the upper part of the neck, those first 2 joints in the neck, the first one helps us nod. The second one helps us rotate. The second one in particular does half of our rotation. Every time you turn your head, the second joint in the neck does 45 degrees or so of rotation. Okay. Most people with headaches and migraines have lost that mobility. All right. So picture your head. It weighs 10 to 12 pounds on average. And our neck is very mobile, but it's tasked with holding up our head throughout the day. Now, gravity and stress weighs down on us. A lot of us sit. Maybe we've had a car accident in the past. For whatever reason, our neck may not function the way it should. Now, our bodies are really good at compensating, very good at compensating. So we can go a long time with these neck type injuries and not really notice it. But at some point, the tension increases enough where it crosses the threshold, and then we start to feel the pain. Now, the pain in the neck is perceived as coming from the head. And so that's what you actually feel as a headache. Now, oftentimes people actually do have pain higher up in the neck here. Many of your listeners, if they have headaches or migraines, they're probably like, oh yeah, I know what spot you're talking about. And that's the actual, that's the spot we focus on for treatment for restoring function. Okay. Now, when we do that, that's what I'm talking about. When I started to see those patients with migraines, the headache patients, it was like, boom, this is easy. The migraine patient, I'm like, well, it's the same thing. You have the same stuff going on. Let's just treat it and see how you improve. And the amazing thing is it works. It's probably 85, 90% of the time that people are getting about 80-90% relief, meaning if you're going from 2 to 3 migraines a week, we're getting you down to a migraine or less a month, and it maybe just be a headache, mild headache. Some people don't even deal with that, but we shoot for 80-90% reduction. Okay, so that's I can stop. Obviously, I can teach a weekend course on this.
No, doctor, I think that's the most defined description of what a headache and a migraine is, and where it can result from. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, at least, I know it's not the depth of it. I mean, like you said, you can teach this course, and there's more to it, obviously, from anatomy, biology, and all the stuff. But totally understandable that for us, normally we don't see it that way. I mean, like to your point, you referred to the referred pain, which typically that's like, I got a pain here. I don't know. It's here. I don't know where it's coming from. And you start like just thinking. At the time when someone has a headache or migraine, they're really not thinking much about that. They're just thinking about the pain itself. I just want to get rid of it. And you're right. Whether we go to a doctor first or not, sometimes the first immediate reaction, let's just pop some pills.
Yeah.
Start with Tylenols, the Advils, and all the stuff. And most of those, they're temporary and something that they don't even work. You can pop as many, just you're more your liver than anything else. And that's about it, right? But you're right. And then the next thing is like, well, maybe it's more dangerous stuff, and X-rays and stuff, can come in as the next step, or MRIs. Now, sometimes, and we're going to talk about insurance later, that could be also difficult to justify and get payments for, but that's another story. And then your practice is really, and I think it's innovative because you said it, not everybody's looking at it. I mean, you have the neurologist, you have chiropractic, you have different angles of the medicine, world that actually tackles different things. And they all kind of have a way of doing and dealing with certain parts of how we work, and sometimes alleviating even the pain. I mean, I've had folks that talked about, the muscle, and how if you build your muscle, it can actually help your bones, and it covers your bones. Similarly with the chiropractor, world, so there's all these things. But the one thing that always eludes us and escapes most of us is like, how do I get rid of that? And I think, again, everybody has that. I mean, there's a level, and to your point, we don't even correlate. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that. All these years that you've lived, you've done a lot of stuff to your body, and you just don't realize. And it gets to a point where you just clearly stated that, oof, your body's going to give up. It's not going to say like, enough is enough. I can't take this anymore. You got to do something about it. And typically that happens as you get older. I mean, listen, I hit the 50s, and to your description, that's the same part that hurts in I don't have headaches, but I do have neck pain.
Yeah.
Whether it's from the phones or just, sitting and doing like a lot of work in the computer, but it does. Sometimes you do bad moves in the exercise. You're at the gym and you're like, oops, you do one thing, ouch, my neck is not happening. Sometimes you sleep the wrong way, maybe. But here's the fun thing that this is like, we talk about, I am addicted to coffee. Now I get headaches. No, I'm not. I'm just, I'm just giving an example. But I do like coffee. But I can get rid of it. You have people with cigarettes, for example, right? They stop the cigarettes, they get headaches. You got people with, drinking, and then they stop, or they're not drinking enough, they have headaches. See, these are like all the things that we think normal people know, that this is potentially the cause of the headache, or whatever the level of headaches that you get. Then, like I said, the coffee is like the most, normal one. You just don't get enough coffee, or you just skip a day and like, oh, I got these headaches, I got to get my fix. And you go grab yourself a nice little espresso, and now you're good. And that's, again, it's just the same thing as the medication. It's numbness of something, but really it's not the core issue. I think that's usually the problem. We all look at the symptoms, not the actual source or the root cause.
Yeah. So a few things with triggers, because in the headache and migraine space, it's very confusing for people, just as you're talking about here, Hurricane, that there's all types of things that will impact someone's experience or trigger their migraine. And so, but what we're seeing is that the body just has all these different systems that impact your experience with pain. Okay. So remember that pain signal hits the brain, and then the brain has to acknowledge it, has to do something with it. Now, the environment that you experience that pain is going to look different from person to person. So that's where we talk about threshold. So the threshold is going to be able to fluctuate in every individual, it's going to be different. So the level of tension, we're talking about the neck, the threshold, we're talking about the environment that your body is experiencing the pain in. So a big one for women is hormone fluctuations. Okay. Estrogen levels will impact the body's threshold for pain. And so oftentimes they'll go down this road of trying to manage their hormones, which I'm more pro managing them in a natural way. And so I'm not against, like, if there is some sort of hormonal dysfunction, pursue that. But it's also important to understand that estrogen levels changing is not necessarily the problem. It's just changing the environment that you're experiencing, potentially a neck problem in. Think of barometric pressure. So a lot of people think or will experience headaches or migraines triggered with barometric pressure changes. So this one's kind of cool. So if you think of someone with a knee replacement, a total knee replacement, and they can always tell you when it's going to rain, right? The barometric pressure drops and they're like, hey, a storm's coming. And that's because they feel it in their joints. Their joints stiffen up. Well, this neck problem oftentimes is a joint problem. And so there's a resting level of inflammation within the joints in your neck. And so the barometric pressure outside changing is going to make that much more sensitive. So oftentimes people get headaches and migraines when pressure changes, when the barometric pressure changes. Another thing is food, diet. So you talked about caffeine, sugar intake, gluten, dairy. So oftentimes I'm sending people to explore that, whether it's with a nutritionist, maybe a functional medicine doctor, because systemic inflammation in the body is going to dramatically lower the body's threshold for tolerating pain. And so all of those things are valid and they're worth pursuing. But I think we also need to understand where the actual pain is coming from, because most of the time they don't reasonably explain why you have a headache, because everyone goes through those. And, a lot of people don't have headaches. So why do you have a headache, even though you have the same experience as someone else? So, most everyone drinks coffee. What separates people that drink coffee or stop drinking coffee and get a headache to those that don't? And I would argue, unless you're very dehydrated or, it's an extreme situation, I would say your neck is probably actually driving it. It's just changing your threshold for, your brain being able to perceive that and sort of tolerate the pain when it gets that signal.
Wow, that's pretty deep, Doc. So the question now, we almost identified the different sources of the potential and, what happens to all of us and how we interpret, the type of pain that we have. But now I come to you with some sort of a headache level, could be migraine. You will be able to identify based on the definitions that we've talked about. And then now, what kind of process do you have to take, and how long will it take for someone, for example, to align and adjust? You mentioned already a good, percentage of success, but how does that process work? Just for our audiences, this is probably news to a lot of folks that I can get, a relief. Damn, I want to do this, right? And so the first thing they want to ask is probably like, where can I go? How do I get it? Well, how long is it going to do? Is it going to be painful? What kind of exercise I'm going to do? And that kind of thing. So guide us through that process, Doc.
Yeah, I would say it depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to someone that's out of state, we have people that fly in, probably a couple patients a month are flying in for treatment. We try to compress our plan of care into a week or two, and that can be really effective. So we see people every day for hour appointments. It's primarily hands-on. So like I said, we're looking at how the upper part of the neck and the shoulders and the jaw are functioning. And think of it as, we're using our hands to apply specific pressures through these joints so that they learn to move again. The sort of novelty of it is it has to be very specific. So if you think of, oftentimes people will think, well, can I just like stretch or do some home exercises to alleviate the tension in the upper part of the neck? We have a guided sort of self-guided self-management process that we take people through that can be very effective. So I won't say no to that, but what we find to be most effective is if we can get specific pressure to restore function in these joints. And so what we have to do is we're working to like undo years or decades of these joints not being able to do their job. So there's a lot of compensations we see when we're first working with someone. And so we start at the specific joint level and try to restore that joint to start moving again. Because you can imagine if so C1 and C2, so C1 is shaped like a donut, C2 has this thumb-like structure that sort of it's mechanically it allows us to rotate. And so us putting specific pressure through there over and over again allows us to teach that to move again. Now there's all sorts of muscles that interact with that joint. Those muscles have been wanting to do their job, but since the joint's not allowing them to move, those muscles get kind of irritated. And then it also changes the resting position of the head. Maybe your head's tilted one way or the other. And so unlocking that joint, just providing freedom to the joint itself, is that process, and it's hands-on. We like to spend about an hour with a patient each day. Now, if you're in town, if you're in Colorado and you're able to get to us on a regular basis, our plan of care is typically twice a week, and we go for about 8 weeks or so. But the cool thing is within 2, 3, 4 visits, most all of our patients are seeing an amount of relief that they haven't really seen before. And so our whole plan of care might take a couple months, which I think is still very short for people that have had migraines, for decades. But within 2 weeks, you can really start to feel like, oh yeah, we're hitting things that have not been hit on before. The other thing I'll mention is, so since COVID, we've had to provide virtual options for people. We've come out with a few courses. We have one that's called the Headache and Migraine Masterclass, and then we have health coaching. And what we do with that is, so people from the comfort of their own home can go through our masterclass, understand where their headaches or migraines may be coming from, have a sort of self-management program. So the structure or sort of 3-step plan for self-management is to exercise regularly. And there's a different, there's more to that as far as what exercise can look like. It's have a specific neck shoulder stretch sort of strategy. So spending 5-10 minutes a couple times a day doing specific stretches. And then we also want to help find a provider if that's needed for in-person. And so our health coaching is set up to help people through that process, keep them accountable. And we've actually seen that be really impactful, just because our neck is generally angry at us. If we sit, if we have a desk job, all the different types of positions and stresses that we place on our body. And so a lot of what we do virtually is just remove those and add in things that are therapeutic. And that can be, we can see really good results with that without having a patient actually come out to see us. And so we're excited about that process as well. But ideally, we'd like people to, come in person. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Well, thank you, Zach. And by the way, I was going to ask about that. I mean, for people that are not able to travel to you, is there a solution? And certainly the pandemic was a great opportunity to be creative enough to actually still be able to deliver the services, remotely, which means now that you have that ability for people that may be further out, maybe out of the country, or maybe just states that they may not be able to travel for whatever reason. And again, probably, I don't think there's many of the specialty that you do out there. I mean, they have other, I guess, disciplines or other types of practices they can seek, but not exactly your kind of system. And so that was great to hear. But you've alluded to teaching people how to identify themselves and also like to switch and shift some ways of their behaviors, right? Which now that leads me to the next part of the discussion is that we all have there's 2 parts. There's the ones that are just starting their lives and what we can tell them, things to prevent, maybe not to get into that threshold of and avoid it, even if preventative type of measures. And then of course the people that you've helped, cure, or at least, you've helped them diminish, that level of pains and maybe just to that once a month kind of concept. And then what can they do to really maintain and not go back and revert to a similar state? Because again, I think we are the ones who cause these things. I mean, at the end of the day, individually, we're mostly responsible for it. I mean, how we sleep, how we do things, how we work out. I mean, I'm telling you, I've seen, people do crazy moves in the gym, and I'm like, that's got to hurt eventually. I mean, maybe, and that's the other thing. That's the other part I think that we need to be clear about is that it's funny because if you asked me 20 years ago, I would probably not even be having these discussions because I thought I was invincible body-wise, right? Like, you can't, pain is not something that you can, it's just how it is. The younger you are, the more resilient, the more your body is stronger, and you're not going to feel as much pain as you get. Then you get to the point where like, shit, everything, I'm sorry, everything hurts. The joints start like, you start like feeling those aches. I'm like, wait a minute, is that just aging or is that something? But when you realize that over the years, you've damaged yourself a little bit. I mean, in my case, I've been in martial arts since I was 9. I've had my share of problems, break-ins, joints, all you name it, muscle. I got actually into physical therapy before and chiropractic because I used to spar and I was literally hurt. And so that was a painful couple of months for me, that I had. It was back, and so it was difficult. But I know for a fact that whether you're active in sports, that's usually a good place to damage yourself. Fitness, world, that's that. I mean, if you're not proper about what you do and you don't understand what you're doing, free weight sometimes can be crazy. People don't have a good balance. There's no spotter, boom, ouch, something cracks, and then now you're like, this way, right? And it's hard to come back. So my question is really like, what can we, and I think it's probably obvious, but I just more from a doctor's perspective.
Yeah.
What are some of the measures that someone should take? I mean, especially our younger, folks, and then we'll talk about the folks that have had situations and they're restored to a good place, but what measures can you do? Whether it's physical activity, lifestyle, or even nutrition, as you mentioned earlier, you do have some guidance in the case of hormones and maybe just like what can get you in a better place.
Yeah,
that's a mouthful. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think the question is the question I would pose to the listeners is how can you be healthier? And I think connecting just general health to their headache or migraine experience. And in my world, specifically, what does it mean to physically be healthy? And that's what I'll speak to. I mean, if we talk about diet, it'll just be general terms as far as, eat in moderation. And if you want to go down a specific understanding of what may be inflammatory, maybe an elimination diet, but oftentimes it's helpful to work with a specialist there. In my world, as far as movement, what is the body physically wanting us to do? It really comes down to that. We just should be moving. So I always say the next posture is the best posture. So one of the assumptions that people have is at the end of a hard day, maybe emotionally stressful, maybe even physically stressful, they think I just need to relax on the couch and that'll give my body a break. Or if they feel like their headache is building, that can be another assumption. Like I just need to sit on the couch and relax and that'll be therapeutic for my body. That is a misconception because the body ultimately wants to move. It's going to be happiest when these joints are feeling the freedom to move through their full range of motion. The muscles can contract and relax. And so don't hear me wrong, like rest is good. And so sleep, which we'll talk about in a second, is very important. But the resting positions throughout the day that most people find themselves in, whether it's in the morning or the evening, I feel like those are most common as far as like you lay on the couch, maybe you're reading a book, maybe you're watching a show, maybe you're just having conversation, playing a game, whatever it might be. And you're reclining or you're shifted onto one side. So think of your head as the weight of a bowling ball. I think it's important for people to understand that they're asking their neck to hold up a bowling ball because it doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel, for some people it might. We do get that every now and then, but just think of what you're asking your neck to do in these static positions. So if you are sitting, having a neutral posture is going to be best, but ultimately you need to be moving out of different positions all throughout the day. So if you have not exercised or exercise is something that's a trigger, I would just suggest you try walking. Walking can be very therapeutic. And then I suggest that everyone do 2 or 3 times a week of something that gets your heart rate up. So some type of cardio to get your heart rate up, because actually there's a lot of physiological benefit when it comes to pain management and lowering that threshold that our body has. So decreasing the sensitivity that we might have to pain itself. Exercise can be a good buffer. Now, just a little bit of a tangent or nuance or asterisk, I guess I should say, to the exercise component. If people are like cyclists and you're on like your Peloton and you're leaning forward and your head's cocked back, that can actually increase stress. So you might be getting like some benefit from the cardio, but you're also increasing stress in your neck. So that can be triggering. And so that's why I say you have to find something that your body does okay with, but you're still getting the benefits of exercise. And that can look a little bit different for each person. but it's worth it to pursue that. And when it's not helpful, typically people will notice that, like, pay attention. So if you do an exercise, you're getting your heart rate up, you feel good during it can be pretty immediate, like right after you feel like you've got a headache or neck tension buildup, but it can be within 24 hours as well. And so you don't really want that. And that's where, like, we try to help people understand how to get into exercise. So it's movement throughout the day, taking regular walks, paying attention to your normal, like, sitting or postures, even standing. If you're someone who shifts onto one hip or the other, try to stand with your weight through both feet. Think about any sort of, like, curvature through the spine is going to translate all the way up into your neck. And oftentimes people that have these neck problems don't really like side bending. So if you're asking your head to side bend just a little bit by shifting your weight to one hip when you sit or stand, that can be a little bit aggravating. And then finally, the sleep component is really important. So oftentimes this is like a really low hanging fruit. Like, people have called me. I actually had one patient from Europe, and we just did a phone consult, and he said he wakes up with headaches. He wakes up with his migraines most often. And so if you're someone that wakes up with headaches or migraines, the number one thing I would suggest is you make sure that your sleeping position is not adding stress to your neck. If you're sleeping on your stomach, you're asking your neck to be in a rotated position when that upper joint doesn't want to rotate. And so it's natural for the tension to build, and you might wake up with a headache. So we suggest side sleeping or back sleeping. Back sleeping is probably best. If you're side sleeping, you're in a little bit of a vulnerable position because you naturally will want to turn onto your stomach. A lot of side sleepers, I call them pseudo stomach sleepers, because maybe their shoulders and their head are on the side, but then their lower body's twisted. So Hurricane, if you can imagine, like, the top leg's bent, and so their hips are rotated a little bit. So what you want to do there is stick a pillow in between your knees and then hug an additional pillow so that you kind of have those barriers that prevent you from wanting to roll forward. And then as far as side sleeping goes, so there's all sorts of, like, really expensive pillows out there. If you sleep on your back, I wouldn't really worry about a pillow so much. You just need something thin. But if you're a side sleeper, I would say it's worth investing in a good, like a foam pillow, because it's going to hold its shape. It's going to support your head. You got to account for the width of your shoulder. And so having your head and neck in neutral when you're on your side is important. And so those are sort of the basic components of what people can do. And that would be, if you're a parent thinking of your 10 or 12-year-old, I would apply those principles to them. If you're someone that's gone through a program, the same thing applies. I mean, we want everyone to just think about general healthiness when it comes to your body and movement.
That was pretty good. And actually, I love those suggestions, because I think for our audiences right now, we know what needs to be done. I mean, literally just from the sleep. And by the way, I relate completely to what you just said. I do side sleep, and you want that little bit halfway on your belly. it's just almost the right way. But I love the idea of putting that pillow and kind of almost putting a barricade, so you don't actually have to, like, it's always one of those things, that you cannot drop, right? So it's important. And thank you for that. And you mentioned something about the bike, the Peloton, whatever, like the type of bikes where you actually cycle. And, there's one other thing that I wanted to ask about. I think that is becoming more of a trend in the last decade plus, which is the habit of having phones. We all are looking down to the phone. I mean, you're talking about the neck, and I know everybody these days is doing this. As you mentioned, I talked to on the other show about the chiropractic, piece of it. But this is something that's becoming more and more relevant, because I think everybody is looking down and their neck is in the same position over time. And I guarantee, well, I'm not guaranteeing, I think that's probably a good percentage of people that you see, and probably an increase in these types of headaches and migraines, in the more recent years. Is that a fact, or is that just me being me?
No, that's that's very true. The hard thing is, there's so many things that will impact the amount of stress that we experience throughout the day. And it's safe to assume that looking down at your phone, I mean, the amount of stress that's going through your neck when, if you hold a bowling ball close to you, it's a lot easier than, holding it a foot or two away. So same is true for your neck. If you're hanging out over your shoulders, the way the neck is designed, as the bones stack on top of each other, is in a neutral position. They can relax and they can rest. And so having your head forward looking down at a phone, it's naturally going to increase the amount of work that these muscles called the paraspinals and the suboccipitals will have to do, just because they have to contract to hold your head up. The problem arises not necessarily in putting your head in that position, but the length of time it's in that position. And that's why I say like the next posture is the best posture, because it's not as if we have to be robots or really militant and always be like rigid and upright. We just need to be move and be fluid. And so finding yourself in that position for a period of time, a couple of minutes is okay, but it's just and this is probably more true with my younger patients, my middle school, high schoolers that have phones, is where they're just constantly on them, and maybe they sit on their bed, they're doing their homework in their bed, and they're also looking at their phone in their bed. Like that's, I kind of cringe when I hear that, because it's really hard on the spine to sustain that. But at that age, the body's pretty resilient, and so they can tolerate it. I think people, what I would love for people to understand, and as we educate, they start to think differently. There's so many things that our bodies tolerate well, or relatively well, because we can compensate and our bodies are resilient. But really, it's asking too much, and it's adding to the stress that's already there. But in the moment, we don't feel it. And so that's a problem. Like when you're looking down at your phone, you don't feel like you're doing something that's aggravating to your neck. But in reality, it is. And so my goal in my podcast and when I talk to my patients, just to be in your head, so that the next time you look down at your phone, you're like, oh yeah, that guy said I need to move more. And honestly, just that can have an impact, because if you think about that throughout your day and you're not asking your neck, like I talk a lot about time being on your side or time being against you. So throughout the day, you put your body in all these different positions. Is it going to be therapeutic for you, or is it going to increase the amount of aggravation or tension that's already in your neck? And you kind of have a choice on which one you choose. And if we can put time on your side, then it's like the impact that we can have on this neck problem can be pretty amazing.
Well, thank you, Doc. I appreciate that. That's pretty cool. And I had to ask that because I know that there's a trend. I mean, you just hit on the money there, because my kids have that. I'm actually sometimes on the phone too, but I do have one of those and usually watch, everything like this. I probably like it, but your hands are extended most of the time, and you have to your eyesight is not the same. So it's a little hard. So I have it at a zoom level, but so I try to compensate certain things, but again, I'm guilty just as everybody else. I think most of us probably watching and listening, we've done some of that, but I do exercise and do other things to keep, even just doing the show, like, you have an hour and you sit in and and I have my teleprompter in front of me right now. So I'm looking at you, but sometimes I got to do this just to keep my, when you're talking to just get my stretch. But so thank you for that. Now, another question is, I know earlier you mentioned something about, we talked briefly about medications and that you airing more the natural piece of it. Now, what's your take on cannabis and the CBD? I know that's probably a different topic, but that's, now it's more trendy in terms of pain management, and I've had different discussions about it. I'm not sure if I think Colorado is one of the states that is ahead of the game with that. So what's your take on that? I mean, is there a benefit to it in terms of, or is that even something that you would recommend to people? Because there's always a debate about that.
Yeah. So personally, and in my practice, I would say that it's not very common. And I'm actually trying to think of a time. There may be one patient where we had the conversation, but even though Colorado as a state is relatively open to recreational use or even medicinal use, it's not really something in my practice we see very often. I honestly, I don't know if I necessarily have a pro or against opinion on it. I'm probably more net neutral, because when it comes to those types of, I put it in the category of medication though. I can't speak to, any of the side effects or the impact on the body, but I'm going to assume that there's some level of impact there outside of just pain relief, right? Like, so it's not totally benign. There's some other effects that need to be considered. And the other thing, it's going to change the experience, right? It's going to change your body's experience in the environment that you're experiencing pain in. And so I would imagine that it is going to be helpful. I know it's used a lot in chronic pain, people with headaches and migraines, or maybe a type of headache called a chronic daily headache. I think that's the scenario where I've had people utilize it. The topical CBD creams, oils, things like that. If they give some relief there, like I'm fine with that stuff, but it's not necessarily something that I'm getting excited about, because it's a little bit different than our approach or philosophy. And like, we want to address the underlying source of pain. It could be something that really helps manage symptoms. If someone's just finding themselves in this debilitated cycle of headaches and migraines. But ultimately, if they're coming through our practice, I would like them to not have to have any of that, right? And I think that's ultimately the goal for people, is they don't want to do that. But if it helps change their experience and they can function, they can get back to work, then yeah, it's just another tool that they can utilize, which I'm okay with.
Well, first of all, I love your answer. It was excellent. But to your point, I think that still will be masking the pain, or at least, just, it's not, if you're clear of anything that can potentially mask it and you can get the results, then that's, exactly it's effective. And you can, because even for you as a doctor, if someone is kind of always halfway, they're not feeling it. And even you want to see like, well, how are you feeling today? I feel good. I mean, you're not going to be able to give them the best because you don't know where that pain is. So I get it, and it makes sense. And I like you said it best, is that the idea is to treat the core, not just the symptoms, and therefore you won't have to worry about it. Now, if you want to use it just to have fun, that's a different story. So now my other question is the topic of I guess everybody's on their mind is like cost, right? I mean, there's always a cost to medicine and to any and in the insurance world, physical therapy is always looked at very tightly, I know that because I mean there's processes and approvals and authorizations that are usually required. All this in your practice is a little more different than the standard physical therapy. Do you see any challenge with the insurance world? And again, in terms of payments, did I touch a button there?
No, kind of. I mean, I'll try to summarize my thoughts, because it's a big topic. It's something that again, we could go on a lot of tangents there, but our practice we call it a cash pay. That doesn't mean you have to come in, give us cash. We don't work with insurance. And that's intentional. Yeah, that's intentional. So I'll talk about insurance. Insurance does dictate how providers practice. I mean, it's certain things reimburse higher than others. And so you're just playing this game. So if you're in the in-network model, you're trying to be profitable by billing certain codes, maximizing time. And oftentimes that is not that's not, I would say, it's not effective. It's not patient-centered. So oftentimes you're doing things just to get the reimbursement, which is almost like, I don't really blame practices in the in-network model, because you have to have a viable business, right? And businesses have to be profitable. And the margins, specifically within physical therapy, I can't speak to other types of healthcare providers, but the margins are really small, and physical therapists don't make that much money. So you're asking these people with doctorate degrees that have gone through maybe $150,000, $200,000 worth of student loan debt, and you're paying them maybe $75,000 a year. And then, your margin as far as profit is so little, like you got to squeeze a lot out of them. So oftentimes those practices, they just kind of churn and burn. They're called mill physical therapy practices. I mean, and there's like, you kind of have to fudge ethics to some extent. So anyways, that whole model is very frustrating for physical therapists. I worked within that for a bit, and I just didn't like it. I didn't feel like patients with headaches and migraines would be served best in that environment. And then the other side of it. So if we're talking about costs, migraines are, I think they're the number 2 most disabling, we'll call them a disease within the world. Okay. So like cost on our healthcare system, burden on people's lives as far as lost time at work. So it's a huge deal. All right. Pharmaceutical companies know this, and they pump a ton of money into research and new pharmaceuticals. I mean, we'll watch the Super Bowl here in a little bit. And I can almost guarantee you there will be some medication for migraines. And so the idea is that people, it's really valuable if you can help them with that. Okay. So working in a cash pay model, a lot of people, they identify with their insurance. You pay these premiums, it's like whatever, $1,000 a month or $800 a month, whatever you pay. And so it oftentimes can feel kind of painful to work outside of that, even though we can work towards deductibles and super bills and all that, which is a separate topic. But anyways, what we try to do is show people the value in their life. If we can help them, on average, it's 80% improvement for about, 80-85% of people that work with us. And so if we can take you from 2 to 3 migraines a week to, 1 or less migraines in a month, what is that worth to you? Our whole process for in-person is $3,000-$4,000. And then, virtually, if you go through our health coaching and $800. And, the listener I don't know what their perception of that is. In my mind, it's incredibly valuable because what we're looking for is for the person who says, well, if you could do that for me, that would be worth $30,000. Like if I could get 2 to 3 days of work back a week in my life, and the emotional stress this has on me, I can't be a mom, I can't play with my kids, I come home and I'm drained and I'm aggravated. I'm driving and I get this aura and I have to pull over, and that's terrifying. And so we feel like we're adding a ton of value. And so that's how we're trying to, I guess, communicate with people. And that's where a lot of like the podcast and education comes from. The other thing I've noticed, if we're talking broadly about healthcare, is I work with a lot of providers that sort of think a little bit differently like I am in their own space. So like dentists, optometrists, medical doctors, we could call it maybe like a little bit more of a holistic approach. And so maybe they have a similar understanding of like medication has its role, but we need to understand the why. So providers that ask the why question are who I look for. And unfortunately, those providers find themselves having to just work directly with the patient instead of insurance. And so I don't like it. I don't love, I know that it's a little bit more painful for my patients, but unfortunately with our healthcare system and the way it is, and insurance driving a lot of patient care, that's sort of just where we found ourselves and where a lot of these other providers find themselves. And I'd love for that all to change. I think there is some momentum in the direction of like people wanting to find better care. They're willing to go out of pocket. We have health sharing like ministries popping up, which are, they're kind of like function as like cash pay patients. So all of that, I think we'll see a change. It just sort of takes enough people to say like, hey, my insurance is not valuable anymore because I'm not finding the relief I want.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's an honest response, and it's valid too. Because listen, I am actually, my day job is in the insurance space, and I work in the government programs specifically. And but I understand it. It is a difficult world because, to your point, I mean, providers are often businesses that have to survive, and you're right. If the PT codes that you submit are not the right ones, you're not getting much, and even the reimbursements can be low, and therefore you tend to order. And that's what the insurance usually are more like difficult, because they want to make sure you only give the right treatment, blah blah blah. You can't do this, you can't do that, so it makes it very difficult. And to the patients, at the end of the day, it's all about the patient, or in the case of insurance members, if you think about them, in the long run, there's more problems, because if they don't get fixed, they're going to wind up in surgery and hospitalization. And by the way, the insurance would not like that in general. So it's just finding that middle ground. I think is the hardest part, and it's difficult. And you're right. A lot of practices now tend to cash only, or like payment programs or alternative ways of payments. And even for like people with Medicare, that's also something when they have their own Medigap policies and all those things, sometimes that can help as well. But you're right, it is not a simple place, but pain is pain, and sometimes people will pay. And you're right, what is it worth for me? And at the end of the day, I can probably skip a couple of meals a month to get a couple of outings, dinners, whatever, and submit that to my health. I think in the long run is going to pay off. And again, it's a matter of choice, and you're right, it's an education piece as well, and everybody's going to see what that value. And health is everything for everyone, because to your point, if you're not healthy and you can't function, I can guarantee you that I don't care what job you're in, if you keep not showing up, there's a time when they're going to say, have a good day. And that's just the way the beast is in this world.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
sucks for what it is. Been around long enough to know that I don't care who you are, what level you are, what money you make, and what corporation. You're only as good for the time that you're there. And then if there's anything that in your life changes that doesn't meet their expectations, there's a good chance you're not going to be there. I don't care what labor laws they have. There's always a way where that finds its way, also against you. So it's not made really for the employees overall. I mean, some companies do better than others. But at the end of the day, you're right. It's just that. But your health is everything, and you can find yourself healthy, and then you can do more. But if you're losing that part, is going. So thank you, doctor, for actually breaking that down. And again, I have no shame saying this because yes, I mean, I do tend to believe that there is a mission in a lot of depends on insurance, and the commercial insurance is different. Exactly what it is, all money. And the government program is a little different because we're subsidized by the government, and there's more oversight. So we work with Medicare Advantage, we work with those kinds of plans. It's a little bit less complex, but
Yeah.
it is still rigid. It is still processed. It is still painful for the doctors, and in some markets you have no choice. But subspecialties usually do tend to, make their own, formulas. And the dentist world is one of the most, great examples. They don't subscribe to a lot of insurance. They don't care as much,
Right.
and it's for the most part. I mean, some insurance does, but you still got to pay the most, and it's co-pays and that kind of thing. And by the way, you mentioned deductibles; they're always going to be there, and a lot of companies you'll probably spend as much just in deductible before you get kicked in. So,
Right.
what's the point, right? So again, it's just the value. So again, for our audiences, this is by the way for those people that are watching and listening right now. We're talking about the U.S. Now it varies by country. In some countries, if you don't, it's all cash. You don't pay, you don't get anything. And in some countries, like in Canada, for example, it's a different system. So every nation has its own policies and how they do the healthcare. I think the healthcare overall in the world sucks overall, and I'm not talking about the delivery piece of it. It's just the way it's administered as a business, as just the process. It's not like it's easy access. Everybody gets the best. Some countries have maybe gotten closer to that best formula, but I don't think the whole world does, and definitely not in the States.
Yeah. I guess my the one thing I'd like to say is, my soapbox is this is how we function. Like I said, as a cash pay practice, and but my soapbox is not necessarily like anti-insurance. That's a decision we made, and we feel like it allows us to treat people the way we want to treat them. But my soapbox and my mission and everything I want to do is surrounding, this headache and migraine space, and how do we help these people? And so in network, out of network, if you can find the right provider, let's do it. Right. Let's find a solution there. And I think I am hopeful that we can sort of blend these two products and really, like you said, aside from the delivery of the actual healthcare, plan of care, whatever it might be, how people interact with the healthcare system, it seems like it needs some improvements. And so, but you either got your choice. You either work with the in-network model or you go outside of it. And it feels like either way, you've got your challenges. And so you just got to take your pick.
Well, listen, and by the way, I think you've been very kind by your statement. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done than a little, but that's a different story. So I do have, thank you for that. So I have a question about your name. I mean, the company's name, Novera. Mm-hmm. Now, is that like a Nov and era, or is that, am I getting that right? It's novelty era or something?
Yeah. Nova is Latin for new. So it means new era.
Yeah.
New era of healthcare, new era of what the patients that go through a process, what I want them to feel and experience in their own life. And so you got it. Not everyone gets there, but that's what it stands for.
Yeah, I was literally looking at it, I'm like, it has to have a meaning because it sounds like, a complex word, but it's simple in its own meaning. But it's very innovative. I mean, it is. I mean, you're doing something new edge, different, and it just really stands. I mean, congrats on the name, man.
Thanks.
and the practice and the work. And also, I mean, I know you're doing the podcast and sharing that. Like I said, I mean, Anthony, we can help here. So how can people reach out to you? So I will have the link to your site and your practice in the description show. And obviously people can reach out to you if they need. I mean, I'm sure people watching and listening, they might have experienced, the headaches and the migraines. They just can't figure it out. And maybe there's a way here, and hopefully you can be the solution that they've been hoping for and looking for. So you never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can help one person, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's what I always say. If I get one patient or one person, or even with my podcast, it impacts a lot of people that, you know, never even reach out. And so I'm happy to we give away a lot of free information. So you don't even have to pay us, and we could probably have an impact on your life. So the Headache Doctor podcast is probably going to be the most helpful source. I'm also got a pretty good following on TikTok under the Headache Doctor, and then Instagram, Facebook. If you can find us at Novera Headache Center, Novera. Our website is noveraheadachecenter.com. And on our website, if you're not able to come in person, you can purchase the Headache and Migraine Masterclass, and we'll have a discount code, 10% off, with the if you use the word hurricane. So
thank you.
Promo code, yeah. And for the listeners, and then if you're interested in going through health coaching and stuff, you can also do that. But that's pretty much it. So Headache Doctor podcast, if you just want to know more, if you want to explore how to interact with us, I would say go to the website.
Dr. Johanthan Taves, thank you so much for the show today, and really, it's a lot of insights, a lot of great stuff, and I think I learned a lot. I know that our audiences will benefit from this talk, and hopefully, many will see the value of reaching out, at least, you know, one way or the other, to get, you know, some of their headaches removed. I mean, literally, I don't mean the headaches in the light term. I mean the physical headaches. But yeah, so, and just keep up the great work, man. I truly enjoyed this session here. Thank you so much. Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Pleasure. And again, folks, it is the end of the show. So as always, thank you for being with us, for watching, for listening in. And we'll be talking soon. New day, new show and topic. Stay tuned. Bye for now.